everybody, and welcome back to TechStrong Unplugged. I'm your host, Tan Solomon, and this is episode 28 of our series. In this episode, we're taking you to AI Dev Summit 2024. There, our co-host Cassandra Chin met up with Silas Marvin, and they discussed Rust, PostgresML, and the art of simplicity. Silas is a software engineer at PostgresML, and he shares his journey into programming, as well as the power of open source communities. Without further ado, let's head over to AI Dev Summit.
Welcome back to TechStrong Unplugged. My name is Cassandra Chin, and today we're here with Silas Marvin.
Great to meet everyone. Great to meet you.
Can you do a short introduction about yourself?
Yeah, for sure. My name is Silas Marvin. I work as a software engineer at PostgresML, where we build Postgres extensions. Yeah, I've been programming now for I think about 7 years. Started right when I was getting out of high school. Went to Portland State and got my degree in computer science. I mostly work in Rust, and I'm really passionate about machine learning. Yeah.
How did you get into Rust?
Rust, oh man, this is actually funny. I had just finished college, and for everyone who's done computer science or hasn't done a computer science class, you kind of they make you take a couple classes on a specific language like C++ to teach you programming, and then after that year, you kind of get to choose whatever you want to do. And I mostly worked in Python and JavaScript, which was really fun. But I just gotten out of college, and I was like, man, you know what? I really need a specific language that I'm just passionate about and could really use. So I bounced between Golang, where I was looking at Golang a lot. I was looking around at some other languages, and I kind of just decided to jump into Rust. And I feel like I chose correctly. I'm a big Rust fan, but there are a lot of other awesome languages out there too.
What impacted your decision with Rust? Do you just like the code syntax or the community or?
That's a really great question. I think that when I first started with Rust, I didn't understand why everyone loved it so much, because it's a very confusing and complicated language. I would say it's one of the harder languages to learn. But the more that I got into it, the more I was like, wow, this is incredible. Because even working through the Rust book or something, and I've had other friends who have gotten into Rust tell me this too, it really feels, it feels like a language that people were very passionate about when they made it, right? But it also feels like a language that was constructed very intentionally, right? There isn't a lot of, random things that don't really make sense in the language. Everything feels very well thought out. And they have some really good examples in their RFCs of why they're doing things the way that they're doing. I think one of the reasons why I love Rust so much right now is not only do I love the features of the language, but I feel like it has probably the best community that I've ever seen. And I'm sure there's other communities, but probably the best open source community that I've ever seen. And when I say that, I mean, if you go and you look at a lot of the packages that are available on platforms like crates.io, all of the popular packages are done so phenomenally well, and the documentation is incredible. It's really easy once you get into Rust to really build whatever you want, because the tools that you need are pretty much there for anything.
I think it's really cool how you're so passionate about Rust.
I think it's an incredible language. There are a lot of other amazing other languages out there too. JavaScript is incredible to work in. Well, it can be incredible to work in. TypeScript is, extension of JavaScript is awesome too. And I just love groups that have great open source communities. And you see that with Python too. Python is also amazing, especially for machine learning applications and working in machine learning. I think the groups TensorFlow and PyTorch and even Google Jax are doing incredible.
When you say community, do you mainly engage with people online GitHub, or do you go to in-person meetups? That's
great. I guess when I'm talking about community right now, I'm not even talking about necessarily a Discord community or a Mastodon community or an in-person community. I more mean the ecosystem of the language, right? When you look at the Rust ecosystem, and it's I would say that a big part of the ecosystem are all the crates in the ecosystem, right? When you talk about the Python ecosystem, I'm talking about the PyPy packages out there, right? Or whatever package manager you want to use. Yeah, I guess that's what I mean. So the people, yeah, but a lot of times just the open source developers that are building these things out.
Have you built any applications with Rust or things which you're proud of?
Yeah, great question. All of the stuff that I do for work, most everything that I do for work is in Rust. And yeah, it's a lot of what we do is open source. So at PostgresML, we have a lot of open source stuff we push out. It's all Rust written. I'm pretty proud of it. I think it's cool stuff. It's really fun stuff to work in. Yeah, and I mostly work. It's actually interesting because I write our Python and JavaScript SDKs, but I write them using Rust. So it's all Python and JavaScript wrappers around our actual Rust SDK. So it's fun because I do get to work in a lot of cool, like dynamically typed languages, but I also get to work in Rust, which is really fun.
What's the reason for having the wrappers in a different programming language?
This is a great question. There's a couple reasons. I think there are a lot of benefits for using a strongly typed, statically compiled language, right? When you're building complex systems, especially a language like Rust, where you have some guarantees of memory safety, right? So by using this underlining system, not only are we fast, we have guarantees of memory safety. We want to translate those to other languages. The other reason is, there's a lot that goes into building a complex system. Like the actual, like what I've worked on, it's like thousands of lines of code. It's a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort to build this out. You have to write a bunch of tests for it, right? Like this is months of developer work to get this. If we were to rewrite it in Python, it'd be the same thing. Yeah, we already have the code in Rust, right? But if I'm going to translate it to Python, that's a ton of work. I got to rewrite all my classes in Python. I got to write a bunch of tests in Python, right? I still got to make sure it's all working the way that I want it to. Even if I already know what I want it to end up looking like, it's still a ton of work. Same for JavaScript, right? If I wanted to end up writing this for JavaScript, it's going to be a ton of work, right? I'm going to have to rewrite all my tests, rewrite all my classes. But if I'm just writing some wrappers around it, that's a lot easier. So that's the main reason for working in Rust. It also lets us bind to languages like C really easily. So yeah, that's one of the primary reasons.
I think that's an interesting take on wrappers. You can kind of save the amount of effort of completely rewriting it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see this in most languages, right? You see a lot of, there are ways to call down into C functions with Python. There's a way to call down into C with JavaScript. You get that with Rust, too. There's a lot of Rust interaction with C. So it's really fun to stay pure within a language and just, work within Rust or just work within Python or just work within JavaScript. But if you want to have this, if you want to be able to reuse code that other people have written, you'd usually end up dipping into foreign function interfaces, which isn't always that bad. It's a little bit of a learning curve sometimes, and sometimes errors cannot be the most fun to deal with. But yeah, it's cool. It's really cool.
Do you want to talk a little bit about maybe more of what you're doing in your current job?
Yeah, for sure. I could talk a lot more about what I'm doing on my current job. So I work for PostgresML, as I mentioned. We build a machine learning extension for the Postgres database. If you're not familiar with Postgres database, it's a relational database system. It's very similar to MySQL. It's open source. It actually got the number one most liked database or most used database on Stack Overflow this year, which was really cool. That's huge for the open source community world. And yeah, we build PGML, which is an extension for it. And really what PGML does is it takes machine learning models and it brings them to your data. So if you've used anything like Hugging Face before and you're familiar with some of their APIs, you can do pretty much everything that Hugging Face does now with SQL functions in Postgres. So I do work a little bit on our actual extension, but primarily what I work on is making it accessible to application developers, right? Not everyone is a SQL developer. Not everyone knows how to write complex SQL queries and take advantage of in-database machine learning. So I work primarily on making that accessible for application developers who work in Python, who work in JavaScript. We're building out an Elixir extension right now, which is a really cool language. We also have a C SDK now too. So that's primarily what I work on. I also do some integrations with third-party libraries. So if anyone's familiar with Llama Index, they're production abstraction. It's a Python library, a JavaScript library. It's a kind of an abstraction for developers building RAG applications. I built a integration for them this last week, which was really fun.
Earlier you were saying that you make this more accessible to developers.
Yeah.
How exactly do you do that?
Yes. Yeah, this is great, right? So when you're building any kind of library, right, there's a trade-off, right? Let's, this is a great example. So there's a lot that you can do really anything, right, with our extension, right? You have a bunch of SQL functions that give you machine learning capabilities for text generation, splitting, embedding. That's awesome. If you want to build an application from that, that means that you need to manage uploading documents, splitting documents, embedding documents, storing these sectors. That can be a lot, right? So you would have to write that yourself. Now, to make that more accessible, because we know these are common patterns that people want to be able to do consistently, we can write a library, another library on top of our library. So now we're 2 libraries deep here. That does that for you, right? So we know the common tasks that developers want. We know what they like doing. We can write another library that makes that easier, that does a lot of that functionality for you, right? So instead of you having to write all these functions, you can call a function that we wrote, create a class, construct a class in Python, pass in the name of the collection that you want, pass in some documents, and we'll do that all for you. Yeah, I guess that's what I mean when I talk about making it more accessible. I mean, abstracting away some of the complexity, right? So you don't have to be a SQL developer anymore, and you don't necessarily have to write all these pipelines out yourself.
I think it's nice you can make it a little more simple.
Yeah, it's awesome to make things more simple, and it's really a trade-off, right? Like when you're building libraries like this, there's a really fine line between giving users complete control over everything they want and making it really complicated, right? You don't want to give people too many knobs to turn, or you're not abstracting anything. So that's an interesting trade-off to kind of figure out and learn and build out.
I can think a lot of like desktop applications where you're balancing between more features or simpler UIs.
Absolutely. Think of, GitHub has like a popular GUI interface, right? That a lot of people use for managing their Git repositories, right? And that's great. And it's an abstraction behind, it's a library, right? It's an abstraction behind the actual Git command, which you can do everything. It's just using the Git command underneath, right? It's just an abstraction over that Git command, because the Git command can be really complicated, and you can do incredible, crazy, complex things in the Git command, right? Yeah, I think it's exactly like that.
So today we're at AI Dev Summit. Have you been to conferences like this before?
I have been to I've been to the Postgres conference in San Jose. That was interesting. That was a lot more Postgres developers. And a lot more Postgres focused. This conference is cool because I think it focuses a lot more on machine learning and artificial intelligence, which is really fun. I haven't been to a conference this big before.
Is there any like talks or sessions you're excited to learn about? Or are you giving your own session?
I am giving my own session. Yeah. So to be honest, I haven't looked around a ton at other sessions. I'm mostly probably going to be managing our booth, and then I have a talk tomorrow at 11 on our integration with Llama Index. And why we think PostgresML makes RAG applications easier, which will be fun. Yeah, that'll be really fun.
I think that's definitely interesting.
Yeah, it should be cool. Yeah, it should be cool. It should be really fun.
And Llama seems really popular nowadays. I hear it everywhere.
Yeah, Llama. Yeah, I feel like, I don't know, it might have been Meta that started it with their Llama models. I'm not 100% certain, but Llama as a phrase, yeah, is very popular. And it's funny because you get things like Llama File, Llama CPP, which are both backends for running machine learning models, and you get Llama Index, which is, a library for building out RAG applications, and then actual Meta's Llama models themselves. So yeah, it's it's really popular.
I think we've had a really good chat today, Silas.
Yeah. Thank you. I really appreciate having
So thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, of course.